We spent a lot of time talking about starting lineups here on the Locked On Kings podcast, but what about closing lineups? Who are the best five on the floor for the Kings to win basketball games in crunch time? Jason Ross joins me on today's episode of Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all regular season and all off season. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports producer and reporter at ABC 10 News here in the California capital, formerly an employee of Sacktown Sports 1140, formerly known as Sports 1140 KHDK, the flagship radio station of the Sacramento Kings, where I worked every single year and every single second that I was there with Jason Ross, who is an absolute legend in the Sacramento sports media industry. Jason Ross, you should be familiar with his voice. He is the partner to the G-Man, Gary Gerald, on Sacramento Kings radio broadcasts, hosts pregame, postgame, also provides some color for G-Man, halftime analysis as well. If you're a Sac State Hornets football fan, you know Jay Ross is the voice of the Sacramento State Hornets. And he's a very, very good friend of mine, a mentor of mine here in this industry. Also, the original host of the Locked On Kings podcast. So to have him back on here is always a treat. Jay Ross and I are going to spend some time talking a little bit about the KZ Okpala decision and the starting lineup for the Kings, at least in their preseason opener against the Los Angeles Lakers. But really the main meat and potatoes of this conversation is the Kings closing lineup and who the best five would be consistently on the floor for the Sacramento Kings to close out games, especially close games, and hopefully win games more often than not for the Kings. It's sometimes your best five players. Maybe it's the best combination of players. So Jason and I want you to send your closing lineups to us. You can reach me on Twitter at Matt George Sack. You can reach Jason on Twitter at Jason Ross 1140. You, of course, can email me your closing lineup, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com. Or if you're watching on YouTube, leave me your closing lineup in the YouTube comment section down below. But for now, please enjoy having back the OG of the Locked On Kings podcast, Jason Ross. Joining me right now from, I used to call it Sports 1140, and I'm trying not to call it Sports 1140. It's Sacktown Sports 1140 here, the radio home of the Sacramento Kings. He not only hosts a show with Carmichael Dave in the morning, he is also the color analyst for the Sacramento Kings broadcast team alongside the G-Man Gary Gerald. He's also the play-by-play voice of the Sac State Hornets football team. What else? Am I missing anything, Jason Ross? Are there other titles that I can get in there for you?
Incredibly average golfer.
Incredibly average golfer is a good one. I got one. How about former host, the original host of the Locked On Kings podcast, back with me here on Locked On Kings. Jay Ross, it's been a while.
It has been a while. How you doing, Matt?
I'm doing very, very well, especially now that Kings basketball is back. Although in our first preseason game, Jason, we got a surprise right out of the gate, which was, now it's the first preseason game. It's preseason starting lineup, so I don't think it's worth overreacting about. But KZ Okpala starting at the 4 spot over both Keegan Murray or Trey Lyles, which I thought the battle was going to be in training camp. What was your initial reaction to seeing Okpala, who we were wondering was if he was going to really make the roster and make the rotation, being a starter on game 1?
What? It was kind of that. I was honestly surprised. I really was. I don't think I want to read too much into it, but we naturally do, right? I go, wait, okay, why? Why would this happen? You draft Keegan Murray high. He has a great summer. He seems to be the projected fit, looks like the perfect fit. The only thing I could associate it to was just maybe comfort. Mike Brown, a Nigerian team with KZ Okpala, I know what he can bring, and certainly that's defense. And you did see it in the limited time in the starting lineup. But I'm certainly not the coach. I would do it differently. I mean, I think Keegan Murray, I could see him in the second group, how the fit really worked. He kind of really gave a good spark to that group. But, Matt, you've seen him enough. I just think he's going to fit beautifully with Sabonis, with Fox, as a first, second, third, fourth, fifth option. I don't think it matters for him. He fits in. He'll get in. And, Coach Brown said he has to earn it. I haven't seen every practice, but one preseason game to me, he's earning it day by day.
And that's the question that I have too, is he does have to earn it. And even Keegan has said as much. He said he's going to earn everything that he gets in this league. But how has KZ Okpala earned it? That's what I'm curious about. And I look forward to the opportunity of being able to speak to Coach Brown, because to me, the only thing that really makes sense, and it's not disrespect to KZ's offensive game, but defensively, we've heard, or when KZ was signed or given an opportunity here with the Kings training camp roster, I remember going back and finding a clip of Mike Brown talking about Okpala being a defensive player of the year candidate. He might have said that at Summer League, if I'm not mistaken. Like, he really believes in KZ's defense. And I understand he's trying to fix the horrible defensive identity of the Sacramento Kings over the last couple of decades. So it makes sense if you want to have a more versatile defender on the floor to set the tone at the beginning of the game, especially when you're taking on a team that has LeBron James on it, like you did in your preseason opener. But at the same time, if that player is not going to be able to fit offensively with Fox and Sabonis, space the floor, if KZ's not hitting outside shots. Now, Mike Brown wasn't here last year, but it almost becomes a Mo Harkless issue all over again. And I wonder about if it's worth the effect of the offense to slightly improve the defense.
Yeah, it's a great question. And sure, it's something the coaching staff is mulling over. I mean, bottom line is I can see what he can provide defensively. He's going to have to hit the corner three or the angle three a couple of times just to keep teams honest. But I also then would almost counter coach and say, if that's the route you're going, and that's fine, because defense, you know it, man, it's been 28th, 29th, or 30th for years. Start Mitchell as well then. Like, I mean, there's no doubt he's your best guard defender. So I think they'd be small with Fox and Mitchell. He said it's going to be Fox, Sabonis, and Barnes. Well, if you think Okpala is your best wing defender and then Mitchell's your best guard defender, defense has been a weakness. I would almost do that if that's your thought process. But, you know, it's one preseason game. I hope it's just, hey, it's our first preseason game, and that's what we're looking at. But we'll see, I guess, when the second one comes up on Sunday.
How much do you put into the start defensively that the Kings got off to in this game? It was 12-3 or 14-3, something along those lines, including a couple of layups at the rim. It wasn't the best start offensively. I like the fact that Mike Brown took a timeout, put the same lineup back out there, and they looked sharper. They looked better defensively at that time. But how much do you read into the fact that you make this move, you start Okpala to improve the defense, and still right out of the gate defensively, the Kings struggled in one game?
Yeah. It wasn't like it was that easy for the Lakers. They did get a couple at the rim. They weren't shooting very well. The Kings shot horribly in the beginning too. And I know that would help their defense a little bit if they could get it more set. But it's hard to read too much into it. I mean, I think the totality of the game, one of the reasons why the Kings won was their depth. I mean, the Kings didn't play their starters in the second half, neither did the Lakers. But we're talking about AD, LeBron, and Russell Westbrook. The drop-off there is considerable. The Kings' second unit was Keegan Murray, Mitchell, Holmes. Like, these are NBA guys. And then it looked like they were playing a Vegas Summer League team, and they just went right past them and defended and did a lot of good things. So, to me, if this team is going to be better defensively, it's building the habits in practice. It's building the habits in quarters and in games. And there was a play last night or on Monday night, Matt, where it was Malik Monk. I mean, Malik Monk basically blew an assignment, got blown by. It's going to happen. Mike Brown calls a timeout, and he got into him. And I think that's what needs to happen. Monk's probably a better defender than that. Guys get burnt, but here's my teaching moment. Here's what's acceptable. Here's what's not. And if you just keep holding the standard, that's how I think you get better. Now, can they be – I don't know what your expectations are of the team defensively. I don't think they got a great bunch of defensive players, but with concepts and a commitment to it, if this team can be a top 10 offense with a top 20 defense, that's going to be a much better team.
Yeah, it feels like middle of the pack, right at 15 might be the best case scenario in terms of, like, you'd say average is a low bar to set, but when you are bottom of the league to improve to middle of the league, that's a significant jump for any team to make in just one offseason. So if the Kings can somehow find a way to be average to slightly below average defensively with the offense as good as we expect it to be, to me, that is a tremendous win for this team. But also, Jason, like, we look at rotations in a preseason game, especially the first preseason game where 20 guys or something like that play, you can't read too far into it. But I did notice that KZ Okpala played the fewest minutes out of the starters. He played 10 minutes total, which I think the most a starter played was 16 minutes, if I'm not mistaken. Keegan Murray ended up playing 21 minutes, I believe, and that's just to get the rookie as much time as possible, which I'm all for, and he had a great game because of it. But is that a scenario where if KZ Okpala continues to be the starter for defensive purposes going into the beginning of the season, but he ends up playing some of the fewest minutes of anybody in the rotation, is that do you understand that for setting that defensive tone early on, or is that not maybe the most effective way of using your starting lineup when one of your starters ends up playing the fewest minutes?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I would have to monitor that if I was Coach Brown because, I mean, if you're going to play him the first run of the first quarter and the first run of the third quarter at the end, I don't know, that's a 14 to 16-minute run. And Keegan Murray, if he's assuming the backup there, he's playing 25 to 28. I don't know, where's your net win there? Like, unless you're just setting this an unbelievable tone and the Kings are always up, 16 to 4, well, then you probably keep playing that group. So it's a little bit of a weird scenario. And I've had a couple of people tell me, well, it's really no different than, when Bobby Jackson used to come off the bench and he was one of their best players, could start on every team. I said, yeah, the difference is Bobby was behind Bibby.
Right.
I mean, Keegan Murray behind KZ Okpala is not the same thing. And I think you draft him that high, you have high expectations, and everything he's done has supported the reason to play him. I mean, it's not like, well, Keegan doesn't look ready. He looks a little timid. Maybe it'll take some time, which is okay. But in this case, Madam, you see him. He looks as NBA ready to me as anybody, and I think he would fit as a starter. I think he'd be fine as a reserve guy. But personally, if I'm coaching this team, I put him in that starting lineup and have no reservations about that at all.
Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by BetOnline, your number one source for football betting information all season long. And when I say football, I don't just mean NFL, of course, college football as well. You can find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every single game that you can find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. Of course, when NBA season gets going, I guess you can bet right now on NBA preseason games if you really want to. There are future bets out there like Sacramento Kings odds to win the championship. I think the over-under on their win total is like 33.5 or something like that. I would smash that over if I were you. Keegan Murray's odds to win Rookie of the Year, maybe Malik Monk's odds to win Sixth Man of the Year. There are all those bets out there right now. And then once Kings games actually start, you of course can bet on those as well. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MLB baseball with the playoffs about to start, MMA, boxing, and golf. They have it all. Head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. Starting lineups are important and the optics of it, and players want to start, of course, and things like that. But closing lineups are, I think, one of the most difficult things to figure out with a team with depth, because there are 8 guys on this roster, in my opinion, that you can make cases for and should be on the floor, could be on the floor to close out a game. Now, closing lineups are a lot more situational than starting lineups are. Are you down by 6? Are you up by 4? Are you trying to hold a game? Are you trying to come back really, really quickly? But I look at closing lineups that oftentimes are your 5 best players, period. So in a general sense, if we're doing like an averages thing, what is your most common, looking at this roster, if you are Mike Brown, what is at this point your most common 5 guys that you would expect to or want to have on the floor to close out a game?
I think you said it perfectly. It is so situational, but if I'm just trying to encompass almost every situation, which, it's never this easy, I think I would go to your philosophy you said at the beginning. It's your 5 best players. And to me, almost by position, I think I'm closing the games with likely Fox, Herter, Barnes, Murray, and Sabonis. Now, situational. Sabonis is in foul trouble. You're playing a smaller team that's trying to hit threes. It's really hard to keep Davion Mitchell off the floor if you're up a possession or two. Can you go bigger and play Keegan at the 5? Barnes, you need another shooter, throw in Monk with Herter. I mean, I think we're talking about the same 7 or 8 that you kind of referred to. I feel like Holmes is a major part of this team in a rotation. I feel like he would be a hard one to fit in closing because if you need a big, it's probably Sabonis. unless there's just major foul trouble. But I think you still might lean to going with Keegan at the 5 just because you might need it. It really is going to be situational. But my initial reaction, I guess, would be I'm likely closing. I think they would with Fox, Herter. I like that size there. Barnes, Murray. I like that poise. And then Sabonis is just so good. I think that's the group that most likely will be trying to close out wins or come from behind games.
I love what you said about how difficult it is to keep Mitchell off the floor, because that's the issue that I'm struggling with when I've had this conversation with others is like Davion Mitchell to me is so important and so impactful on the defensive end of the floor. Now I'm waiting for the context of what does Mitchell look like offensively consistently with De'Aaron Fox, because if there's like in the same sense of a KZ Okpala move, if Davion Mitchell isn't capable of playing well off of De'Aaron Fox and vice versa, then you have a problem there offensively. But I think Davion Mitchell is incredibly important for a closing game, even if you're ahead. I think having Davion Mitchell or if you're ahead, having Davion Mitchell on the floor to get some stops and secure the win. But if you're behind, having Davion Mitchell on the floor to create steals, create fast break opportunities, close the gap in that way, so the 4-point hole doesn't suddenly become a 6 or 7-point hole. I think Davion is incredibly effective there. I also believe that, and this is maybe just my ideal scenario, is a De'Aaron Fox, Davion Mitchell backcourt defensively can be one of the most disruptive when they're locked in the NBA, because I look at the work ethic that Davion Mitchell has and the quickness that he plays defensively with on ball, and I look at De'Aaron Fox's build and go, De'Aaron can do the same thing if he commits to it. And we've seen flashes of that throughout his career. So I like the idea of the pair of them defensively at the end of the game, whether you're ahead or behind, disrupting ball handlers and not letting opposing offenses get themselves set.
Yeah, I do too. And I think at some point we've got to get De'Aaron past that. We all have to say the same thing. He has the ability, or he can do this. He's got to do it. He's got to start doing that. We're back to the consistency of the habits of, hey, all of a sudden, no, De'Aaron's just a good defensive player. We need to be saying that phrase as opposed to, well, he can when he commits to it. And hopefully that's something Mike Brown can do. I mean, I would think we used to talk about it for years with the Warriors and Steph Curry. Well, he's a liability, but they got Clay, they got Draymond, they got other good defenders. He's really become a good team defender. They don't take him off the floor. He used to be out of the games at the end. As good of an offensive player as this league has, they would take him out because he was a liability. That's not the case anymore. And so, can De'Aaron get to that mode where it's someone you count on, and if he gets fouled, he makes his free throws. If you're on offense and you need a big play, he can do that. But equally, the same thing needs to be said on the defensive end with him.
Do you have a preference at all at Harrison Barnes' position 3 versus the 4?
I think he's better at the 3. I think that's a better fit, but that's, I know positionless is whatever. And I felt in the first game, the preseason against the Lakers, there ended up being so many cross matches. I think the Kings switched a lot of things, which I think they want to do to make them versatile. And if you have Herter, Barnes, and Murray, they're basically all the same size, just a little bit different frame there. So if you can switch everybody, I think that's helpful. But then, okay, then Harrison, you might be guarding Anthony Davis to Russell Westbrook. I mean, if you're switching all that stuff. But I think he's better suited with the 3, and I like Keegan at the 4. That's why I think that's a good starting 5 mix. But yeah, I mean, the good thing is he is pretty interchangeable.
Yeah, you kind of started the answer to my next question, which might honestly just be the exact same question in a lot of ways, but it was the idea of Keegan Murray at the 3 instead of at the 4, which we've seen with that full bench lineup. We've seen Trey Lyles at the 4, Keegan at the 3, Rashawn at the 5. And I mean, Keegan was effective no matter where he was on the floor, which is the joy of him. But I'm thinking from a Keegan Murray on the floor with the Kings' best players mindset, Keegan at the 3, I don't think works as well.
Yeah, and I think if looking across the landscape of the league, that 3-4 position right now, I mean, LeBron has the ball a lot, but he's kind of in that 3-4 spot. So is AD, Giannis, Tatum, Durant. I mean, that's some of the league's best scorers, best players. And if those two guys are getting the bulk of your minutes at the 3/4, they got to be able to guard those guys as best they can, right? So I mean, I'm a slightly bit worried about Keegan's foot speed defensively. Not like it's this huge liability, but no player is perfect, and what else can you work on? But that's also, he's just starting. He's just figuring out the league, and between those two, I just think they're going to get the bulk of the minutes at the 3-4. I wouldn't be surprised if Herter plays some 3 though as well.
That's what I was going to ask you too. Is a lot of fans are have the expectation or the belief or the desire to see Malik Monk get on the floor, especially alongside De'Aaron Fox. But if you talk about someone who's a microwave scorer off the bench, someone who can, if you're down in a situational lineup and you need points in a hurry, Malik Monk is your guy to potentially come in and do that for you. At the shooting guard spot, maybe a Bobby Jackson-esque role, just coming off the bench as a pure scorer. If you are putting him in, is Kevin Huerter being swapped out, or are you moving Kevin Huerter down to the 3 and just kind of motioning everybody down one? Because Kevin Huerter, you could argue, played some of his best minutes in Atlanta as a 3, but at the same time, there's defensive questions.
I think it gives them the flexibility, kind of back to, okay, Barnes is in foul trouble, so maybe you take him out, move Huerter to the 3, but you still want some more shooting, and then it's Monk, or I still think the forgotten guy, and certainly was last in of the guys we kind of expect in the rotations. I think Terence Davis can still crack that code somewhere, but it might be who's hotter, who's shooting better, and then honestly probably who's defending better. So if I'm that Monk Davis combo, like Huerter just gives them more size, but between Monk and Davis, what is the difference? They both have been good in this league. They both can be that microwave scorer. We've seen it here personally with Terence Davis. We've seen it happen against the Kings with Monk. So I think between those two, whoever can defend better and make their shots more consistently will probably get the most of those, I would think, back up 2 minutes.
I'm glad you brought up Terence Davis because he's a name that I haven't talked about too much on Locked On Kings over the last week or so when trying to figure out these rotations. And fans have asked me, what about Terence Davis? Why are you forgetting about Terence Davis? And my issue with this is I'm just having such a hard time finding where TD fits in. Like, to me, what makes the most sense is TD being the 10th guy who maybe primarily backs up the wing or backs up the 3. Because with Monk's ahead of him, Huerter's ahead of him, even Davion Mitchell playing the 2 next to De'Aaron Fox is ahead of him at this point. I just don't know where he fits in as a shooting guard. But if defensively he can handle the 3 position, we know what he can do as a perimeter scorer. Like, is that his only real way to crack the rotation consistently, you think?
Well, let me ask you, why are you quick with Monk's ahead of him? And I'm not saying you're wrong. Why do you think that?
That's actually a really good question. The reason why I kind of lean that way is also recency bias is a very real thing, like Terence Davis, unfortunately. And he might have been on his way to having numbers similar to Malik Monk before he got hurt last season. But I think I look at Malik, I look at his track record and his consistency more around the league. I look at what he was able to do with the Los Angeles Lakers last year, of course. And then there is the romanticized connection between himself and De'Aaron Fox, even though that was 1 year, 6 years ago. But there's the belief that the two of them already have an established chemistry that maybe Terence Davis and he, or Terence Davis and Davion Mitchell, or none of these players have been able to establish together, even over the couple of years broken apart that they've spent together.
Yeah, I don't know the answer. I just thought it was because he might be. I mean, the Kings were seeking him. They signed him. Doesn't mean he's guaranteed anything, but I think that's an interesting battle to watch because I think Huerter makes a lot of sense, again, back to the size and how he's played. I mean, he's been a good player in the league in that starting spot, but I don't know for that backup minutes. And I even still throw out Mitchell there. I mean, the more you can play Fox and Sabonis, the better off this team is going to be. And then if you have to sprinkle in Mitchell ahead of those other guys, even at the 2, and then slide them over to the 1, I mean, just the bulk of your minutes need to be played by your best players. And we're looking at guys that are good, but unless some of them have career years, this team is going to be carried by Fox and Sabonis primarily.
Absolutely. Well, finally, Jason, what is it that you're looking for, or has your view changed at all now that we have the context of one preseason game with this group? What is it you're looking for throughout the remainder of this preseason, this upcoming game on Sunday, even at practice this week? Like, what are you keening in on now that we have a little bit of context?
For me, I'm just looking at things that are new to me, and one of them is the new players. But certainly, it's even Mike Brown and coaching status. We watch this enough. You and I are at every game. We probably can figure out, oh, Dave Yeager's about to do this. Oh, Luke Walton's about to do this. Here goes Alvin, and that's good and bad. But I don't know Mike Brown's tendencies yet, and what's that going to be? We were surprised by game 1 with KZ Okpala, so I want to see him. I like how he's gotten after guys a little bit in games. But just he's a new wrinkle, certainly for me. And then he has talked about it. The organization has talked about it. It's defense for me. I mean, it was nice that they won by 30, and it would be great if on Sundays, the first home preseason game, they shoot 70% and make all their. I mean, that's fun, but are they going to be better defensively? And I think for this team to have an improvement, but really it's just a sustained improvement that they're talking about. I mean, we talk about culture, but like if you identify yourself as a team that's going to get after you and compete and defend, I just think you have a chance every night. I think they've got gifted offensive players, but they've got to really commit to this to get out of they have never been recently, haven't been terrible. They certainly haven't been good enough. And we see flashes, but flashes aren't going to work. They've got to do this consistently and embrace the grind. It's not always fun, but if you identify yourself as a defensive team, you got a shot every night. And I think that's what I'm going to watch is just this commitment to defense. There'll be breakdowns. We'll see. Oh, there's another Ole defense. Oh, there's a straight line drive. There's a missed rebound. Okay, but do they happen all the time, or are they happening sparingly? And in the past, they've happened too often.
A thing I wanted to bring up too is what impressed you about this first preseason game, and going off of both the eye test and the numbers for a team that has 10 new guys on the roster. To have a 25 assist to 7 turnover assist to turnover ratio is pretty astounding, especially when we had the expectation that Mike Brown set going into game one, which is, look, we're going to play fast. It's going to be sloppy. We're getting used to playing together. You turn in that kind of assist to turnover ratio and a 30-point win. That really stood out to me.
100%. That was by far the number one. I thought there were moments where the defense was better and there was a commitment there, but that, and then to play all 20, and it never looked like, they missed shots, but they weren't, oh, there's 3 of us in the corner or 2 guys in the wrong spot, or it looked like there was a pretty good flow to what they were trying to do. They didn't force a ton of shots. They missed a bunch, but they weren't forcing them. And yeah, the assist to turnover ratio was really rare for any game, let alone playing 20 guys in a preseason game that featured a bunch of missed shots. You can kind of get into just a ragtag type game, but they really didn't. So that was encouraging.
Well, Jason, of course, you're going to be with the G-Man on the broadcast of every single preseason and regular season and hopefully postseason game this season. Of course, all the great work you do at Sacktown Sports 1140, talking Kings on the morning following the games. I remember what those early mornings are like, so good on you for that grind. Appreciate you spending the time here on Locked On Kings. We'll have to do it again sooner rather than later, and good luck with your average golfing.
Yes, thank you, Matt. I know you usually ask me this question before a season. Do you have a win total for this team this year? Even though I'm not going to hold you to it, but just curious.
No, I think this team is cracking 40 wins. I think they're going to hover right around 500, and I don't know what that's going to be in the Western Conference, because the Western Conference last year was bad. I don't expect it to be the same, especially below like the 5th seed down. But I mean, I'll put it this way, that 33.5 win total or whatever it was set for the Kings, that's one of the easiest overs I think I've ever taken. Easy. Maybe it's an optimistic look at it, but I think I look at this roster and I think 40 wins is definitely achievable.
Did you double down on that?
What are you referencing?
I just didn't know if you made a double bet on that.
Oh, yeah, I'll double down.
Double down now.
I'll double down on it. Thank you, Jason Ross. Always a pleasure to have Jason join me here on Locked On Kings. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. Again, send us your closing lineups. Who are the 5 that you want on the floor for the Kings to win you a game in crunch time? Like we discussed, it can be pretty situational. So maybe if you have a situational lineup, explain to me what situation you want that lineup in the game for. Just let me know. Send them to me. Would love to have that conversation with you. Appreciate your support as always. Can't wait to have you join me on the next episode of Locked On Kings. Remember, Kings are home for the next preseason game on Sunday. It's a preview of opening night as they will again host the Portland Trailblazers, and I'm giving away tickets to opening night on the 19th. All you have to do is go to my Twitter account at MattGeorgeSack, see my pinned tweet, and respond to that with a picture or video or memory or story that you have involving the Sacramento Kings, and you'll be entered to win a pair of tickets to the Kings and Blazers on the 19th on me. Really appreciate your support again, and I will talk to you next time. Until then, my name is Matt George. You have been listening to Locked On Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.